Welcome to Planetary Health First, Mars Next. My name is Michael Mann. I'm the host, and we have a special friend today, Ted Ficken, and Professor Ficken, Ted
Ficken is not. There's no R in it. It's
Ficken. I don't know what I'm on. I'm on a mispronounced guest phase. I tell you, I don't know what it is. I think anyway, but I that's a great show from here on. Everything's going up and getting better from here on out. So anyway, I'll call you Ted because you're a friend of mine, and this is really super important stuff. So if people are wondering why the heck is Ted on, well, this is one thing. That's the book that he's written, and he's writing another book. And that book, if you couldn't see it too well, it's Music of Hate and Music for Healing. So we're going to be talking a lot today about this subject. And I was fortunate enough to know you as a professor doing quality improvement when you were at George Washington University. So go ahead, Ted, if you can share a little bit about yourself and give our audience a little background. That would be helpful.
Thank you, Michael. I'm happy to be here with you today. A little bit about my background. I started my career in healthcare as a music therapist. So I have bachelor's and master's degrees in the field of music therapy from the University of Kansas. And then I went on and got a PhD in public health from Oregon State University. And as a credential, I have a credential as a certified professional in healthcare quality and a music therapist board certified. And up until recently, I was licensed in the state of Oregon, although I let my license lapse because I'm no longer practicing clinically. But over my career, 40-year career, I worked in 10 different healthcare organizations in 5 states, either worked or volunteered or interned. And so I have a lot of experience, mostly in psychiatric and mental health settings and also substance abuse settings. And in 4 of those 10 settings, I also served as the director of quality improvement. So I'm probably very different than most of the guests that you have on your show. And I realized that, but I thought this was interesting and important because music is not really considered much when we talk about some of our social justice issues and healthcare issues. And I consider hate music to be a real public health issue. Any public health issues is anything that affects the health, safety, and security of a community. And I believe from my research that hate music does that. It does threaten the health, safety, and security of communities. Oh, I lost your sound again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. We were having some audio technical before. So those who are listening, thank goodness. Ted, you are perfect. This is Planetary Health First, Mars Next. We cover a vast array. You know, we're not just specific. We try to cover stuff that really impacts people. And health is public health, music. There's nothing more, from you are. So I just want to reemphasize you are meant to be on this show. And this show, I am continuing to dig deeper and deeper as I can to have great, I would say, guests like yourself that are really digging deep on topics that are extremely important. And music is not, it might just be seen as everyday, but there is something transformative and good and bad in it. And I think that's really what you're unraveling. And when you think of it as a public health thing, so how, in the negative view, as a public health, like we know how many people die by smoking or by cancer. Like, how would you, like, tell me, like, as a number, give us the number. You know this because you're a statistician, or not a statistician, but public health. You know all the data that's used. Tell us.
Well, I look at it from two different perspectives. First, there is no data that I'm aware of that says this is how many people have died from music. But I can tell you that we have a lot of increase in hate crimes in our country, as well as other parts of the world. And so I became interested in hate music. Excuse me. I read an article published by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The title of the article was Music, Money, and Hate. And this was 10 years ago. I read this article and I called the author and talked with him. And it was interesting to me. Being trained as a music therapist, I was trained to use music in ways to help people and to heal, and to have positive outcomes, treatment outcomes. Whereas it was new to me to hear that music was being used to spread hate in the world. And it made me angry, to be honest, at first. And it made me hate those haters that were spreading it. And so I started studying it. I read extensively about hate music. I read articles and books by former haters, people that had joined hate groups and left hate groups. And every time there was a mass shooting at a school or a nightclub or somewhere, I would follow the news very closely to see, what do we know about the shooter? What do we know? What influenced this person to act in this way? Why were they out shooting people in a supermarket? And what I discovered was that many of them, not all of them, but many of them had been listening to hate music and had been influenced by hate music, and had spread to them hateful philosophy and a theory about different demographic groups, very different demographic groups, and that they were acting out as a result of being influenced by music.
So I guess with hate music, let's define it. So I know some of us have seen Rocky, The Eye of the Tiger, the movie, running up the stairs, getting pumped, music that might pump us up. But tell us what hate music is.
Well, in my research, I actually found textbook definitions of hate music. But, in general, it's any music that attacks a demographic group. But I found some very common characteristics of hate music. The first one was direct and forceful expression of absolute hate, stated clearly. So you listen to some of these songs and they're saying, I hate such and such, or I hate this group. There's also an encouragement of violence against that specific demographic group. They want to blow them up, they want to kill them, they want to line them up against a wall and shoot them. And that's all in the song, it's in the lyrics. There's a lot of use of taboo slang, generally deemed unacceptable by most parts of society. So there's a lot of profanity, there's name calling, racial slurs, etc. There's a perpetuation of negative or false stereotypes, which is an important one because there's a lot of conspiracy theories and fake news and misinformation and malinformation, and that's all reflected in some of this music. So people that are listening to it start to believe some of this false information. There's lack of support for following the law, and support for criminal activity. So they're talking about assaulting things and destroying things and killing people. And there's antisocial leanings. So like I said, I worked a lot in psychiatric settings and substance abuse settings. And one of the diagnoses used in the psychiatric settings is antisocial behavior disorder. couple of characteristics of that disorder are lack of empathy for others and lack of remorse for their own behaviors. So those are the common characteristics. And I speak a lot to student groups, and I play actual examples of this music for them and have them check those characteristics. And they find most of those characteristics in the examples that I play for them.
So what do we do about it? I mean, it's like there's freedom of speech, people can listen and do whatever they want. And I would say, um, music, like, so how do we balance this, and so what do we do about this?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned freedom of speech, because a lot of hate music is not illegal, and it's considered freedom of speech, and that people are expressing what they believe and how they were raised and what they were taught, etc. Um, unless it attacks an individual, if the music or the song comes out and says, "I want to kill so and so," that's considered a hate crime. And hate crimes are similar to any other crime, except they have an element of bias. So you might commit a crime because of the color of someone's skin. You might commit a crime because of their religion. You might commit a crime because of their sexual preference, etc. And so if that bias is present, then it becomes a hate crime. And hate crimes are defined geographically. So there's different hate crimes in different states and different counties and different cities. And so that's one thing we can do, is know how hate crimes are defined in your location and what's legal and what's freedom of speech. That's very important. I don't want to take away anyone's freedom of speech, but I do disagree with some of what they're saying. So
Mhm.
I am in favor of speaking out against it too. So some of the things,
So what do we do where the government gets involved versus research? I mean, where, like, I guess my worry is that, you know, it's like the chicken or the egg. Like, where do we reach these people to help? I mean, I guess there's a bias to those who don't listen to this. I mean, I would imagine I have a strong bias. Like, I don't ever want to listen to anything that's going to be hating or being involved in that. But where do we find the people before they take this? I mean, how do we prevent this? How do we improve it? Can you, like, what's the best route? Are you offering any of that?
um, yeah, let me check my notes here for a second. There's, I would recommend doing a lot of things. First of all, when as I listen to this music, and it's difficult to listen to,
Hmm.
but it's readily available. You can order it online. You can they'll ship it to you immediately. You can listen
Yeah.
to it. So what I found is that most hate music is generated by young males,
Hmm.
usually between the age of 18 to 30. Now, there are some females also involved with hate music, but it's a much lesser percentage. But you need to be aware of any hate groups in your community. That's one thing you can do. The Southern Poverty Law Center is one of the groups in our country that traces and monitors hate groups. So hate hate groups could include racist groups, the Ku Klux Klan, um, violent extremist groups, militias.
Hmm.
There's a variety of hate groups out there. Hate crimes that are reported have gone way up in the last 4 or 5 years. So we're seeing more of that violence, more of that hate being expressed. So be aware of any hate groups in your community. Be aware of any venues that allow hate musicians to perform.
Hmm.
Um, there are certain clubs, certain venues where they're allowed to perform, or they get hired accidentally. They didn't know what they were going to be singing about. Um, Understand how the First Amendment for freedom of speech works, and so you have to be careful not to say they're doing something illegal if they're not. Um, Join other organizations that are fighting hate and that are, um, kind of trying to preserve love and other positive emotions in the community. Um, Support music organizations. You could support the American Music Therapy Association. You could support, there are other organizations. Crip Hop Nation is one of them. Um, there's several other organizations that are
So what about just like there was a big thing with parents getting involved with labels. You remember with, and I guess maybe this just isn't mainstream, most of this, but like with rap music, forgive me, with, and it was the Beastie Boys from all the different rappers that were using cuss words and this and that. So where does that stand? And with, I mean, obviously hate is specific. It's attacking a certain demographic, a different group. But what about just general music, like that might be more mainstream, that is very much, like some of the stuff I feel like I'm like, gosh, listening to. I have a 14-year-old daughter. This is just not the stuff I want her to be listening to. That's almost more subtle versus that. Is there any comment that you want to make on that and how that connects with this too?
absolutely. The I spoke one time. I spoke at a Catholic church, and before they'd let me speak there, I had to show the presentation to the head priest, and he said, "Oh my goodness, I want all the parents in my parish to know about this." So, parents should be careful to use parental guides on their children's websites. I mean, no, talk to them, talk to your children. What are you watching? What are you listening to? Um, there's all kinds of hate music on TikTok. There's other kind of underground, mostly far right um, um, sources that play a lot of this hate music. You had another question?
Yeah, so I guess the other thing is there some sort of adoption that these organizations do, are they successful in the fact that they're not as blatant as they continue to try to recruit, um and then they get more extreme with their music? How does is there an element that you research that finds how this process of adopting individuals to their community?
Well, one of the ways is that the streaming sources, music streaming sources, many of them have developed algorithms that eliminate certain words. So if they use the word hate, if they use the word kill, if those types of words, they might eliminate those from their streaming service. Um, but parents, I think just talking to your children is the most important thing. What are you listening to share with me what you're listening to. um, because there are kids out there that are finding this music and listening to it and getting influenced by it. And parents need to get involved and say, no, I don't want you listening to that, and here's why. Or the other way is to get those kids, like I said, most of them are young
Mhm.
adult um, males, get them involved in positive
Yeah.
activities. You
So
know,
18 to 30, it seems like the same people on TikTok, social media, Instagram. It seems like it's a societal problem. How are you are you working with any data groups to find the amount of data where these individuals are being, and I guess, they're being, whatever you would say, like part of the, it's almost like a gang ritual that they're adopting these behaviors, they're being brought in. Do you have any data on it? Are we talking a million or 2 million or 5 million, 10 million people that are, you know um, consuming hate music by what are we talking about? What's the numbers?
That's a hard question to answer because no one's collecting those numbers. Now, I mentioned the Southern Poverty Law Center. They track hate music. In fact, if you go to their website, they have what they call their hate map, and they show all of the hate groups that they're monitoring in the United States. You can sort that map. One of the sorts is by hate music, and it will show you where those hate music groups are located in the United States that they're currently tracking. The Anti-Defamation League also tracks hate music, not only in the United States, but worldwide. They put out a list of hate music groups in a lot of different countries.
So how do we, like, I mean, with what's going on with Palestine, what's going on with Israel, I mean, where do we get the language that is, I would imagine there's a massive amount on both sides of that alone that has that created just a massive influx of hate lyrics and tunes for that?
Yeah, the Anti-Defamation League estimated a couple of years ago that there were anywhere from 100 to 150 hate music bands in the United States. I'm guessing that could be higher now because hate crimes have gone up so much. I don't know. In fact, I am planning to do some research in Israel and Gaza to find out. I'm going to contact my music therapy friends that work there to find out if hate music is being used. I know, like in India, hate music is being used against Muslims. I've read about that. It's also, it's not just a problem in the United States. Since music is universal, it is being used against different demographic groups all over the place.
Well, I find what you're doing is fascinating because I think, like, when I think of music, I don't think of hate music. I think of music that just is part of who we are. That allows us, and that's what's scary about it. So, if it's allowing us to identify with who are, like, what more of a powerful way of propaganda and influence for bad or for good? So that's the harm. Because I think of, like, we can agree. Could we agree, Ted, that the Grateful Dead is probably the best, most effective music with their music of creating a community longevity? I don't know. I've heard, I'm not the one quoting this, but, with the concerts, and then they even have a knockoff band, Dead and Company, that's sustaining it. John Mayer, who's a really amazing guitarist, opted to take his career and just go ahead and do this. And, and I guess most of what they're trying to do is just, maybe there's a little anti-law, a little bit of, but they're a community, and it's nothing more powerful than music. And so I'm so glad you're here to really dig deep in a topic that needs to be talked about. And I think with music, it's also Instagram, social media, it's how we feed, like, there's nothing more that we do every day with ourselves, like feeding ourselves with music. And so I think there's a lot of interest that we can do and learn. And if Facebook, is there a ability that we could work with social media, these huge social medias that know these data points? I would just think if there would be some project that some of the organizations, if they were able to pinpoint that and gather some more data on people as a public health thing. Do you see any opportunity with that, a large sweeping push to do that?
Yes and no. There's, hate crimes are reported currently voluntarily in a lot of locations, and they don't report them because they don't want people to say, I don't want to live there. They got a high crime rate. So one thing could be for reporting of hate crimes to become more organized, more, in some cases, mandatory. So there is better data. But I wanted to share a quote with you. This is a quote by a guy named T.J. Layden. He was in the military, and he was recruiting people to hate groups while he was in the military. And so this is a quote from his book. His book is titled Skinhead Confessions from Hate to Hope. And he said, I continued to use the most effective technique to bring kids in, which was music. I was not the first recruiter to use music to indoctrinate kids about racism and white power, nor was I the last. Huge music labels continue to make tons of money using white power and hate-filled Aryan messages, getting kids as young as grade schoolers to listen to racist rhetoric. So it's out there, and there's record companies out there putting it out, and there's they hold festivals for hate group members. Now, I wanted to mention one group that's doing a lot of good work, I think. It's called Life After Hate, and it was formed by a number of members of former members of hate groups. And they came, something helped them change their way of thought, and they created this organization that's based in Milwaukee, I think in Wisconsin. And their sole mission is to help people get out of hate groups. Because once you get into a hate group, it's hard to get out. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like you hear about the mafia, you can never get out unless they just kill you. But hate groups, they don't want to let you go. And a lot of people join hate groups because this is an important point. I mentioned at the beginning that I started off hating the haters. Like, what? I don't like you. You're spreading hatred in the world. The more I studied them, the more I read their books, the more I talked to them, I discovered that they were abused children, mm-hmm. neglected children. They were bullied. They were traumatized in their youth, and they grew up filled with hate for the world because of the way they were being treated. Mm-hmm. So one of the best things we can do is get them involved early in positive involvements. And if they like music, get them involved in a band, get them involved in an orchestra, get them involved in a choir, hook them in, invite them, and I encourage all music teachers to be on the lookout. Where are these kids, troubled youth, that need to be hooked into something positive? The same thing for their parents, because sometimes it's the parents passing on this ideology.
Well, let's get in, and please take it back too if I go down too far of another rabbit hole. But so music can be hate, it can do love. Tell us about how it can heal. Like, there's licensed credential therapists. You can, and in the green room, you shared that there are codes, so you can bill. United change healthcare in spite of them getting hacked. You can bill healthcare as a therapist to tell me how that works, and love to know more, because when I think of feeling better, there's nothing more than a Yo-Yo Ma cello piece or whatever it be, or Handel's Messiah, or you name it, or I know Taylor Swift has gotten a little popular lately too, but I'll stop there.
Boy, you had a lot packed in there.
I know. I'll just let's start with the healing part of music.
Okay, so currently there are 10,000 board certified music therapists in the United States. I was a member of the very first certification board for music therapists many, many years ago, back in the 80s. And now there's over 10,000 of them. They work in all kinds of settings. Like in my book, I talk about 12 different music therapists. One of them worked with children. One of them worked with Parkinson's disease. One of them worked with veterans at a veterans hospital. One of them worked in a national hospice company working with dying patients. So they work in a variety of settings. And they use different techniques in each of those settings, depending on the age range they're working with and music preferences of their clientele. Um, like you just mentioned, in a number of those settings, there are reimbursement channels, so they can bill for their services. Some settings, insurance companies have a code that they can bill under. They might be billed as a music therapist. They might be billed as an adjunctive therapist, an activity therapist. Um, they might be billed as a counselor. That's, I think, a little more rare. Um, Sometimes there's at some facilities, healthcare facilities, there's a per diem rate, which basically means here's a charge you're going to get every day that you're in the hospital or every day that you're in the nursing home.
So what does it look like, Ted, when someone it gets music therapy? I mean, obviously you're not going to do a didgeridoo. Maybe you're going to use a didgeridoo, a percussive instrument versus a violin, an instrument. Tell me, like, what does it look like granular where you're having that encounter with a music therapist?
Yeah, so my elevator speech is often, music teachers focus on music goals. Music therapists focus on non-musical goals. So they're working on improving mental health, physical health, spiritual health, etc., social health. So they might be using songwriting. They might be using guided imagery with music. They might be using percussion techniques and drum circles. They might be using lyric discussions. They're using a lot of different tools depending on the clientele they're working with. Most of the techniques that they're using are evidence-based. And what I mean by that is that they have been researched, found to be effective, found to be important tools. Often music therapists are working as a part of a treatment team. So there's probably a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, a psychologist, a teacher, a music therapist, and they work together to come up with a treatment care plan. Here's how we're going to help this patient. And if you're lucky, and I have been very lucky, you have a doctor who understands how music can be used, and he will order things. He will order, I want this patient to be in your group for this reason. So work on this. So you're following a treatment care plan, and
no, that's cool. So are you always having some sort of instrument on the point of care? Could it be a recording? I mean, like I feel like when you said it, it's a pretty broad brush, and there's a lot of different modalities, a lot of different methods, which sounds really exciting. It seems like there's a lot of art to it as well as science.
The first thing that a music therapist needs to do is a thorough assessment of the patient. So beginning with, what is your culture? What are you looking for from treatment? If they're able to state that, why are you here? Let's talk about music. Do you have any musical preferences? Have you had any experience with music? What kinds of music do you listen to? Was there music in your family growing up? So they do a very thorough assessment, a lot of questions, a lot of observing. And then from that, they then select what tool they want to use with that patient. And like I said, it could be talking about music lyrics. It could be improvising. Tell me how you feel. Just play some music. I had one patient, this was at the University of Kansas Medical Center, where I was using a projective technique where I would play a musical phrase on they're called ORF instruments. It's pentatonic instruments. I would play a musical question, and they had to play me a musical answer. Well, this one patient, I would play the question, and she would just stare at me. And I would explain to her again, I'm going to play you a question, and I want you to play me an answer. And it's supposed to force them to project onto the music. Here's what I think the question was, and here's my answer. So after about 3 tries, I said, "Do you understand what we're doing here? I'm playing you a musical question, and you're supposed to play me an answer." And she said, "Well, that's a stupid question." So, there are funny things that happen too. The lady I interviewed and know who works with Parkinson's patients, she's working on gait. So
Okay.
it's using a lot of rhythm exercises to work on gait because Parkinson's patients have trouble walking. She's also
How about dementia?
dementia. Oh boy, there's been a lot written and continues to be studied and written about music with dementia. You go into a nursing home and you'll see patients sitting around.
Mm-hmm.
They can't remember anything. They're out, they're not reacting to much of anything. And then you bring in a music therapist and they start tapping their toe and
Mm-hmm.
they start singing along and they start talking about the time they remember that song from. And so it affects a different part of the brain.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, my dad's 91. He has dementia. He's in hospice right now, and it was such a cute thing the other uh, night. Um, he started singing to my wife, "Happy Birthday." I mean, he's like very, very much throughout the whole time in dinner, not much going on, not talking much. We always have to engage him, get involved. His questions are or answers are really short, very sweet. Yes, fine. How are you doing, Dad? Great. What'd you do today? Not much. I mean, but man, he was so excited. He never sings. He's not a good singer. So yeah, you're totally right. There's something about music that activates, and I guess Parkinson and these neurological conditions are, I guess, with vets too, right? With some paralysis and stuff. But I don't want to. We're going off a tangent, so let's get back to the topic at hand. So
one of the stories in my book, I tell about Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman who was shot in the head at a rally, and she was immediately referred to a music therapist and regained a lot of her speech through music.
Mm-hmm.
And she continues to work with music therapists on rehabilitation. But the music therapist that I interviewed that treated her, a woman named Megan Morrow, she said, we talked about hate music, and she said, of course I would use hate music. Hate music stimulates different parts of the brain, and that's what's been damaged. And she said, and the research shows that when you're making music or listening to music, more parts of the brain are activated than almost any other behavior.
Mm.
So she might have lost a part of her speech processing center in her brain, but using music helped open different channels so she could regain speech. And they started by singing songs that she was familiar with and that she liked, and speech came back because of the different part of the brain being stimulated.
I find this fascinating. Yesterday, and it's going out today, this afternoon, we had 2 guests on psychedelics, and so one's a physician assistant, the other one's more policy and a lot of health policy, academia now. But there's a lot of research on psychedelics for substance abuse disorder. Or across the, PTSD, et cetera, especially with our veterans. But I'm thinking with you and what you're talking about with music and opening up the parts of brains, that's what they were kind of describing with the use of different psychedelics that are opening up those paths of the brain. And also this other factor that I find really fascinating, the ability to step back and be able to observe yourself in a way that's not judgmental, and through that event or that trauma to process it, and under that, with a guide, with that therapist or whatnot. So I feel like music, the power of music is very fascinating with similar, sort of opening those pathways in the brain, like what you're talking about with the, with what was her name? The wife of the ass. What was her name?
Gabby Giffords.
Yeah, Gabby Gifford, with what had happened when she had I guess I don't know how many, but she was having to get all that neuroelasticity back. So anyway,
Yeah. Well, I
sorry.
talked about the guy that shot her,
Oh gosh.
and he had been listening to a song called "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor,"
Hmm.
and was a fan of Mayhem Festival, but he was also mentally ill, and he was also taking drugs. So that's also something that has to be considered, is that, the music, if they're already mentally ill or having mental issues, and then they hear this music and it starts to influence them, it might make them act on it.
Mm-hmm. So where do we go from here, Ted? we have a little more time. I want to make sure I give you justice in what you're doing. You're on a lot of things. I hope you can come back on and bring your friend, share more about this. You are part of the discussion. These are huge topics that, it's so big. It's like, where do you focus in on it, and where do you dig deep?
Okay, so one of the things I talk about is how do hate musicians get radicalized, and how do they get de-radicalized? So they get de-radicalized in a lot of cases because they grow out of it. It's kind of an adolescent rebellious phase that they're going through, and they grow up and they decide that's not for them anymore. A lot of times it's because of their family, their friends, their having children and not wanting their children to hate, hearing their child say something very hateful and going, "Oh no, what am I teaching them?" They get tired of the hypocrisy. There's a lot of hypocrisy in hate groups. They talk about not using drugs because that's just this other group's way of controlling us by getting us to use drugs. And then they use a lot of drugs, and they sell drugs to raise money, and a lot of them go and get help and get therapy. So, medical issues do not discriminate. People might be a hater and they have Parkinson's. They might be a hater and they have dementia. And so you have to, that assessment, again, you find out how they became a hater, and how is that affecting their ability to get help for whatever their medical issue is, or other issues. You could have someone in the hospital because they were beat up at a rally. You could have someone in a hospital because they were overdosed on drugs. So they get help, they get therapy. There's groups out there that, like Life After Hate, that is helping people get out of hate groups. Interestingly, they meet people that they used to hate, and they discover that they don't hate them, and they start asking themselves, why did I hate this person, and how am I any better than them? So for an example is a guy named Christian Picciolini. He was a member of a far-right extremist hate band, and he went to prison, and he was in all kinds of trouble, and he felt that he was a neglected child, and he couldn't get a job when he came out of prison. So he opened his own record store, and he was selling hate music under the counter. But he said, people started coming into my record store, and he said, Black people came into my record store, Jewish people came into my record store, women came into my record store, handicapped people came into my record store. So for the first time, he was experiencing all these different demographic groups, and he said, I liked these people. Why had I hated them? And so that very helpful too. Reach out to these groups, decenter, as
Mm-hmm.
I'm an older white guy and I've been very privileged most of my life, but I need to learn more about these other groups, become friends with these other groups, learn how I can help these other groups, and realize that I'm privileged, realize that other people are not. I've been in a social justice book club with a bunch of music therapists, and one of the books we read talked about the moving walkway of racism, which is, when you go to the airport and there's those moving walkways that just kind of pull you to your gate. And it talked about, that's what a lot of people do. They're so busy leading their lives passively that all these things are happening around them and they're just being pulled into the future and they're not doing anything. So the book encouraged us to get off that moving walkway and start taking action against hate.
Or if you're on that walkway and you're in the left side, slowly walk to the right side for those crazy fast travelers.
Or turn around and walk the other way.
Yeah.
A lot of times the heart convinces the mind to change. So there's a great movie called Burden, Burden. It's about them. It's a southern town where they open a Ku Klux Klan museum. And a minister in the town, a Black minister, objects to that. And so it's an interesting movie about this group of haters versus this minister. And it talks about a Ku Klux Klan member that observes his children playing with he's white, and he observes his children playing with some Black children. And he starts thinking, he goes, they get along fine. They're having fun. They're playing together. They like each other. Why am I like I am, hating other people? So even going to topical movies, reading books, I read a lot of books about hate. But last of all, get these children involved in positive activities, whether it's sports, whether it's band, orchestra, choir, whatever, whether it's, whatever. You look at Caitlin Clark right now, riding high on her basketball skills. But what if she had never gotten involved in basketball? What if her parents didn't support her? What if they didn't go to her games and cheer her on? So good parenting. There, one of the recent instances of hate music being involved in hate. Let me show you this real quick. Well, this is a different one, but you might remember the Highland Park shooting. And the guy who did the shooting had glorified mass murder in music videos that he put on. And recently, one of the shooters in one of the schools, the parents got convicted of not doing a good job of parenting and buying the gun for their son who went to school and killed 4 students. So parents need to pay attention, and they need to talk to their kids. What are you listening to? Why do you like that song? I'm here in Virginia visiting my grandkids and my kids, and my granddaughter, who's 14, is infatuated with this band from Australia. And so she tells me all about this band and plays their music for me, and it tells me why she likes them so much. They're not a hate music band, but they're a popular band. And I tell her about the Beatles from my generation, and we have fun going back and forth discussing the music that we like. So I think parents just need to pay attention. If there are parental controls on their kids' devices, use them.
Well, Ted, this has been great, and I hope we have a few more minutes. Do you have a hard stop?
I would just thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, this has been great, but do you have a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay, this has been really great. What I've gathered, because part of this is just trying to understand, me as my, just understanding more. And with you coming in and discussing this, I've come to understand a lot. I feel just the touch of it. And what I'm hearing is more sympathy, empathy, compassion as a society, more awareness, more involvement. And so that 18, I guess it was 18 to 30, but I really think it starts really pre Instagram, even though some of these kids are getting accounts way earlier. We as a society need to be involved. And like you're saying with your 14-year-old granddaughter, with her music, and really helping our and I guess the probably you have the data where a lot of these children or young adolescents that get involved. I mean, I know when I was coming along, it was around in my whatever 12, 13, I was listening to some of that skateboarder music that had an element of that animosity. There was just an element of that. And I guess that's after when high school came around, I just stopped. It was like what you said, there's that phase where you just sort of get out of that and you go on to something else. It's kind of like a habit, you stop. So I feel fortunate that I was involved with different activities and there was no time for that, playing tennis and sports and different involvement. And I feel like you coming on today has really, the most important thing is as a community of people trying to get involved. And so I'm hoping after once I put this out there, some of the resources you'd mentioned, you can share with our audience, because I feel like you gave, not only your book, but also some of those other organizations that are really helping. Because I know people, parents, families, definitely the majority of people, and this is what this show's about, is about building community, doing good, making an impact. So you really are supposed to be on this show. So I really appreciate that, and help our audience know more what they can do, how I can get involved. I really would appreciate that.
Okay. I'd love that. I have a number of resources I can send you to follow up. I wanted to mention one example because I didn't really talk much about my book. In my book, there's 14 sets of stories, 14 chapters, and each chapter has 2 stories in it. The first story has to do with hate music, either about a band, a singer, a certain song, an event, but it's the backstory about that part of hate music. The second story is the story of a music therapist who relates to that first story. So, for example, the first chapter in my book starts with a story about a band in Portland, Oregon named Jew Slaughter. And the head of the Commission Against Hate Crimes in Oregon told me about this band. So I ordered their CDs and listened to them. And so I tell their story about how they got into hate groups, how they started putting out hate music. And their album was carried by a local record store, online record store in Portland, Oregon. But as soon as his record company was labeled as a hate music company, he dropped that artist. He dropped Jew Slaughter. So now he's back to just selling other artists that are not hateful. But then I paired that with a woman, a music therapist in Portland, Oregon, who came from Vienna, Austria. She was born in the 1890s, came to America to escape from the Nazis, worked at a bunch of colleges in the United States, ended up in Portland, Oregon at the University of Portland. When she retired, she became a registered music therapist and worked for 15 additional years with handicapped children. So that's kind of the way my book goes. There's a hate music story and then a relevant music therapist story. So I hope readers will check it out. They'll learn a lot about hate music and they'll learn a lot about the field of music therapy. Because when I told people I was working on this book, people would say to me, what is hate music? They had never heard of it. And then they'd follow that up with, well, what is music therapy? They had never heard of that. So the purpose of the book is to give you some basics about both fields.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Ted.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I hope we can have you on in the future, maybe bring a friend and talk more deeply about different aspects of this.
Great. Be happy to do that.
All right. Well, this has been an amazing day today on Planetary Health First, Mars Next. Until next time, I hope you enjoyed the journey with us today. It's been a great day.